Hello and welcome back to another of these tier list ranking video things. This today will be the first of a series of videos in which I will go through each era and rank the stories within the context of their era. I'll be doing both classic and new Who, going from the first Doctor to the 13th, but unfortunately I will be skipping Paul McGann because I have not heard enough Big Finish to rank that, and I'm not just going to rank Night of the Doctor and the TV movie. There are 6 columns: absolute classic, great, good, okay, bad, and terrible. And we're kicking off with the William Hartnell era, which I think most of the lists go sort of round the middle. It doesn't have as many absolute classics as most of the other eras, but also there's very little out and out bad in this era. But without further ado, I'll get going, and we'll be taking it in chronological order because my brain can't cope with doing things randomly. And we begin with An Unearthly Child, which I'm putting in okay. Right, so if it was just the first part, it would be going in absolute classic all day of the week. That first part is an immense pilot, perfectly paced, and perfect introduction to all the concepts, all the core ideas of the show. But the next 3 parts are very slow, and the cavemen stuff also sort of happens, and it's quite uninteresting, but it is a very nice contrast to look back on where the Doctor started as a character in this story, particularly when he borderline threatens to club a guy to death. But it's an interesting viewing, and I think the first episode looks incredible. After that, I'm not as big of a fan, but I'd still put it in the okay column. It's not, those 3 episodes aren't bad, they're just nothing particularly special. Oh, here's the unpopular opinion for the video. The most overrated story in the William Hartnell era is the Daleks, which I think is so poorly paced. It's ridiculous. Yes, the Daleks are a genius concept. Yes, Scarrow looks great. The Thals are a great idea. And if it was just 3 episodes shorter, it would be so much better. I mean, it just takes so long to do anything. We're stuck with these bunch of hapless pacifists. You know, when there's a bit when they all get stuck in the cave and they're all trying to climb along a ledge, and there's the one cardly guy I have to keep going back for, and it just really drags its feet. There's also weird stuff like there's a romance between one of the Thal leaders and Barbara, or an implied romance, but I just had already accepted in my brain that Ian and Barbara were a thing, and that sort of took me aback a bit. Also, the ending is a bit of an anticlimax. The Daleks are very effective, and obviously I have a level of respect for the fact that this is the story that saved the show, because they were going to end after Edge of Destruction. This is the story that really took off and saved Doctor Who. So I respect it for that. But as with a lot of season 1, I just find it really drags and it's poorly paced in places. It's not bad, but it's distinctly average. The Edge of Destruction, I will put in good. I really like the Edge of Destruction. It's a nice little bottle episode, just a 2-parter, and I'm always a fan of 2-parters. Or I was earlier on. The JNT era 2-parters are just guff, just ignore them. But The Edge of Destruction, I think, is a really great episode. It's also a very great character episode, particularly for Barbara and the Doctor and their relationship. And it exposes this sort of paranoia at the heart of the TARDIS team, and the fact that the Doctor doesn't really trust anyone. It's a very good episode. I have a lot of fun with The Edge of Destruction, even though it's inconsequential. It doesn't matter to me. A good episode is a good episode regardless. It's very sunny in here. Marco Polo, again, unpopular opinion. I'm not a big... Season 1's just very average to me, and that also goes in okay, because it's okay. It's an average episode, and 7 parts, again, dragging your feet. It looks, well, I'm sure it would if it actually existed, look incredible, and I love the narration from Marco Polo. And it's just a totally different type of story. It's set over months, over a huge area of land. It's this sort of travel and adventure, and you can get all these new characters, but it does drag because they hadn't worked out the pacing of the show yet, and it kind of shows at this point. And this is going to be a recurring theme for season 1 entries, because a lot of them are poorly paced. The Keys of Marinus is, again, okay. Marinus is all right. I wouldn't call it poorly paced this time. It's a lot of different individual stories, very Terry Nation style. You know, there's planet with the evil plants, and there's all these different races. And I think it's an interesting idea, but something just doesn't work. I don't know if it's because the Verd are such a weak villain. I don't know if it's because some of the premises are lesser than others. I don't know if it's because there's just this really dull court sequence where the Doctor and has to defend Ian, who's been accused of murder, which is just the most cliched thing ever. Even by this point, that was cliched. He's been found over a body and accused of it being his fault. Although seeing Hartnell as the lawyer is a great moment, but Hartnell disappears for a large chunk of this story, and it's up to Ian and Barbara to carry it. And in fairness to William Russell and Jacqueline Hill, they really do. And I think that one of the two strongest episodes are the two which just centre around Ian and Barbara on their own, pretty much without Susan, on the planet. I can't remember the names of the actual places, and on the snow planet. And it's a very fun story, but it's not good by any levels. It's fun in parts, and there's other parts of it just really drag. It feels like it should have been something a lot more than it was. The Sensorites, not bad. Okay. Season 1, as I said, is very consistent in its averageness quite a lot, with one exception, which I'll get to. The Sensorites, I don't mind, but I don't have anything particularly great to say about it. The Sensorites themselves are boring. There's turns into a bit of a political snooze fest in the second half, but it's really interesting to see this totally separate alien race and also sort of deal with some aspects of colonialism as well. But then again, there's a conspiring political villain who doesn't trust the Doctor and is trying to frame him for stuff. And you've just seen it all before, but it's very interesting stuff done with the alien planet and with Hartnell and Susan. This is probably one of the best Susan stories, because she's seriously underserved. But this is one of the stories where she really comes into her own. The Aztecs is the exception to the rule. The Aztecs is great. It's a fantastic story. I wouldn't put it quite an absolute classic, but I think it's a brilliant story, and it deals perfectly with the issues of changing history and what it means to change history and the morality of sacrifices. I know it's got a lot of flack from, I don't want to say the woke crowd, but people who want to see it through a modern lens and are looking back and saying the Aztecs is a racially charged piece of writing, but I just find it very enjoyable. It stands up way above the rest of the season because it's very well paced. It's only 4 parts. The settings look gorgeous. Each of the characters, other than Susan, who's on holiday, get their own great story. I think it's the best Hartnell story of season 1 because it shows his comedic side, which he really brought into play a lot more in season 2, which is my favourite element of Hartnell's portrayal of the character. But bringing in him with this sort of accidental romance with the Coco, and also having Barbara being worshipped as a god, and Ian having to fight his way out of every situation. I think it's just a fascinating story, and it's easily the highlight of season 1. It's a truly great story. I also really quite like the Reign of Terror. I'll put it in good. A lot of it's missing, but there are decent. It's not. I don't think it's actual official animation you could find. Some people have done it, and it's online, and it's actually pretty good. Hartnell steals every scene when he is dressing up as this authority figure and just commands the screen. It's a bit long, again, 7 parts, but I really do enjoy this one. Susan is at her worst, it has to be noted, though. She just gets locked up and she screams and she cries, and Barbara finds a way to escape from the prison, and Susan won't go because there's rats, and it's just, I think it's her at her absolute worst. But by contrast, the Doctor's probably at his absolute best because he's just so totally in command of the screen. And I think between this and the Aztecs is when Hartnell really nailed down the role for me. And I was like, okay, this guy is an amazing Doctor. And I'm going to bring this up later on, but I think Hartnell's probably the most underrated Doctor in the fandom. But I'll get to that when I wrap this up. Planet of the Giants, I love. I'm a massive season 2 fan, so this is just going to be a lot of stuff getting very high up. I'll put it behind the Aztecs. I should probably put Reign of Terror in front of the Edge of Destruction. Put it behind the Aztecs, but I think the set design on this is incredible. It could have honestly just been, it was like watching Ant-Man, but in black and white. And I didn't even notice the cracks, didn't notice the creaks of the set. Everything was brilliant. The 2 cliffhangers one involving a cat and one involving someone turning on a tap. It's this weaponization of the ordinary by turning our characters into these tiny little characters. And they also have to deal with this kooky little pesticide plot, which is just a very fun concept. And it's very enjoyable the whole way through. I really enjoyed Planet of the Giants. Very well paced at only 3 parts. Susan is much better. I think she's vastly improved in season 2. Doesn't quite save her character, but she is vastly improved. Barbara's decision making is baffling, but it's just a great story, and it's very fun, and it's a nice little 3-part watch. I could just sit down with Planet of the Giants anytime and put it on. I think it's great. The Dalek invasion of Earth is also great. I'll put it above the Aztecs and Planet of the Giants, I think. It's a dystopian classic. It really is. There's a lot of great imagery, and you've got to think about what it was like at the time as well, because for audiences of the original time, this was only 19 years after the end of the Second World War. And with the Daleks as literal Nazi analogies, this is basically what would have happened if the Nazis had won the war. Seeing the Daleks go past Big Ben, the imagery in this episode is absolutely iconic. It's forbidden to dump bodies in the river. There's the Dalek coming out of the river. Susan's actually done very well again. I think her romance with David, I mean, it's a bit quick, granted, but they're not going to have longer than 6-part stories to actually flesh out a romance with anyone. And I think David's quite a good character. And it's much better handled than most of the companion falls in love and sods off kind of stories, like the ones with Vicky and Leela, which are just not good. And it's such a moment at the end, of course, that everyone always talks about, with "One day I shall come back." And it's an amazing speech from Hartnell, and you can seriously tell William Hartnell's actual emotion being poured into his acting in that scene. But it also makes you realize how far the Doctor has come, because in the very first episode of An Unearthly Child, Susan decides to leave with Ian and Barbara, and rather than let her leave, he selfishly takes them off on these adventures that we've had up to this point. But at this point, he's willing to let her leave because he knows that that's right. And he's learned the sense of right and wrong. And I think that's a very important part. The Rescue, which I hope to watch today, actually, because my brother, I'm taking him through Classic Who, but only giving him like 5 or 6 of the best stories from each Doctor, or the most important, and I put the Romans on. So I'm going to hopefully watch The Rescue just as a little precursor to that. I love The Rescue. I'll put it in good. I'll put it above The Reign of Terror. I think it's a very good story. A little 2-parter, just like The Edge of Destruction, but very fun. Vicky is an immediately superior version of Susan. It's a nice little fun murder mystery plot with Coquillian. It looks great. There's a literal cliffhanger. There's some interesting bits that you just wouldn't expect to find in other stories, such as the crab that Barbara basically kills was actually not evil, and we're on a planet where the monsters are people, and the actual things that live there are basically perfectly harmless. And it's a really, really nicely played, nicely paced story. It also adds as a nice little precursor to the Romans in the rest of season 2, but also as a nice little epilogue to Susan's departure, with Hartnell sort of dealing with her exit. And he has a very lovely rapport with Vicky right from the off, which plays into the Romans, which you might be thinking is an odd one to show my brother as part of this Get Him Into Classic Who project, but the Romans is an absolute classic. It's my favourite William Hartnell story. It is immense, everything about it. It's the perfect blending of the 2 tones of the show. Ian and Barbara have this really dark storyline where they go off, get sold into slavery. You see Ian working on a slave ship. You see Barbara as a servant being sexually harassed by Nero. And on the other hand is the funniest story ever. I think between this and City of Death, they're the funniest 2 Classic Who stories. And the comedy is absolutely perfect. And Hartnell and Vicky's adventure is the highlight of the episode. From Vicky nearly poisoning Nero to Hartnell's little, was it The Art of Fisticuffs, where he batters that guy with a harp. I'm so constantly outwitting the opposition that I forget the joys of the arts of fisticuffs. He's never been better than he is in this story. He's still got the grouchy, tetchy edge, but he's hilarious with it. Vicky is so sweet. And honestly, this whole episode is near perfect. You know, I think that the Nero chasing Barbara thing goes on a little bit too long. It's a little bit carry-on-ish, but this is the best Hartnell episode in my opinion. I absolutely love it, and I will defend it to the hilt. Anyone fancies arguing with me and saying the Romans is a bang average story, please put it in the comments, because I would love to argue with you. The Web Planets, from the best of the Hartnell era to the absolute worst. I questioned why I was watching Classic Who when I was watching this. I actually sat down and I was like, why am I torturing myself with this? There are 3 Classic Who stories of which when I was sitting watching them, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? The Web Planet, The Invasion of Time, and The Two Doctors. The Web Planet is such an awful piece of television. It's ambitious. It's got scale. I'll give it that. But only in terms of all the other characters are insects and not humans. That's the only level of ambition it's got, because the story is just a basic oppressed creatures rising up kind of early Doctor Who story. And it's the Vaseline on the screens. You can never see what's going on. The Zarbi just make the same noises over and over again. It's repetitive. It's dull. It just gets sillier and sillier. At one point, Ian just falls down a hole and turns up in the caves with some bee people who speak in very Italian accents. And just like, what am I watching? Seriously, what is this? And it's such a shame, because season 2 is such an amazing piece of television as a collective whole, but this is just a blight on everything. It is genuinely painful. I watched it in one sitting, which was difficult, but I just wanted to get through it, because by episode 2 I was like, this is going to be awful. I don't have any problem with the costumes, with the people who are quite clearly dressed up in sort of dress up with insects as insects. I don't have any issue with that. But it's just the actual story is so dull. The production is awful. The sound design is agonizing on the ears. Yeah, it's a serious failure for me. It's a real failure. The Crusade, I want to get back to talking about good stuff. Crusade's good. Where do I put it? Not above the Rescue, but I don't remember much about it, but I remember it was very good. Lots of costumes, lots of costumes, very good set design, and a very menacing villain who I can't remember the name of for the life of me, but he was very, very good. Julian Glover was brilliant as Richard the Lionheart, and yes, if from a modern point of view, you'd want a Crusade story to deal with the moral abhorrence of the Crusades, but it's the 60s, and we were just having fun with it, and I really enjoy the Crusade as a story. I think it's very good. The Space Museum. Do you know what? The Space Museum gets a bad rep, but I'll put it in good as well, because honestly, at this point, I'm just a massive season 2 fan. The first episode is so far beyond the next 3. The next 3 are just sort of basic, but never basic in a bad way. Yes, they are just 2 groups of people. One's the oppressors, one's the oppressed, and the Doctor's siding with the oppressed faction and helping them win their freedom. It's very basic, but the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1 is probably elevates it into good. And the fact episode 1 itself is one of the best episodes of the entire Hartnell era. It's brilliant. And this has my favourite Hartnell TARDIS team. It's got Ian, Barbara, Vicky, and the First Doctor, and they are just a brilliant, brilliant TARDIS team. And speaking of them, the chase is going in great. Now, some people want all their Dalek stories to be really dark and menacing, and they want every Dalek story to be like a brutal massacre, but I'm very happy for my Dalek stories to just be fun. You know, I love Asylum of the Daleks because of that, because it's a fun Dalek story that doesn't take itself too seriously. And this doesn't remotely take itself too seriously. This is the most bombastic Doctor Who episode ever, possibly one of the most fun episodes ever, where just random stuff just happens. We're going to the Empire State Building, we'll meet an American guy who's just Peter Perms putting on an accent. We'll go to the Mary Celeste and have Daleks there. It's just Daleks being in places that Daleks shouldn't. We go to a haunted horror house and meet Frankenstein. It's mental in the best way possible. It's very Terry Nation in terms of there's lots of different planets and lots of different sort of things you've got to go through, little hurdles on your story as an adventure. But most Terry Nation stories that do that, they just come off as bland, Keys of Mariner style. But this is bonkers, and it takes the 2 most important aspects of the show, at the time, which was time travel and Daleks, your two biggest pull, and it gives the Daleks time travel, and it is exactly what it says, just a chase through the universe, and that I see why people might think that's dull, because as a story, it just sort of happens, but it's brilliant, and it's brilliant in a mental kind of way, and I love the mechanoids at the end, and Ian and Barbara's exit is inch perfect. I think it's a brilliant companion exit for those two. I still don't know how they didn't age till from the 60s onwards, as Russell Davies claimed, but it works. It really does work for me. And season 2 also ends on a very good note. I'll put the Time Meddler above the Aztecs. I think the Time Meddler is a brilliant story. Again, I'm a massive fan of season 2. I think Vicky and Stephen actually are at their best here. They were weak as the Ian and Barbara substitute, but they're actually okay here. Stephen's actually probably maybe at his best. It's one of his better stories, definitely. But it's all about William Hartnell and Peter Butworth. They are so good on screen together. And again, this plot is just mental. Season 2 did not take itself too seriously. Planet of the Giants, The Chase, The Time Meddler. The plot is that he's going to, use neutron bombs on against a Viking fleet to just mess with history, and because he wants to meet a couple of leaders, and he's just an insane villain. But I really enjoy the monk and the slow reveal of all his anachronistic technology in the church is great. Hartnell era definitely takes a serious hit after Ian and Barbara leave. There is no denying that. But I do think he's very good. This episode is very good, and it's the perfect cap to what, if it wasn't for that thing down there, Web Planet, would have been arguably one of the greatest seasons of all time. Galaxy 4, season 3 is always either great or bad. I put Galaxy 4 in bad, not terrible. I mean, I like the rails; they're a pretty cool design, and I like how they're sort of just monsters that are nice, even though they look villainous, but they're nice, but they don't show their faces in case it scares people. The planet of the feminist women are a bit Chumblies are a bit. The whole episode is just a bit. I'm slightly ambivalent towards it, but I would go as far as to put it in bad column. It's not good level of Doctor Who writing. Mission to the Unknown. I've actually only seen the recreation of this by a bunch of students, which was brilliant. I'll put it behind the Crusade, actually. I think it's a very good precursor to the Dalek master plan, and it's nice to plant that seed that we're going to get Daleks to really sustain you through the next 4 weeks of the Mythmakers, which is not a particularly great story. It's okay, but it's not a particularly great story. And the Vargans are good. Are they Vargans? They're plants? Yeah, I think so. And yeah, it's a very good story, and you realise the sense of scale with the Daleks meeting up with all these other villainous types, and you're like, blimey, the Daleks are about to get their massive moment. But then you have to wait for it, because you've got to go through the Mythmakers, which is, again, not all there. A lot of missing episodes, which can sort of hamper things. I'll probably put it in okay. It's not bad. But unlike the Romans, it sort of fails to meld its two tones into one. And actually, I think the Romans, as much as it's an immense story, damages all the pure historicals that come afterwards, because I just compare all of them to the Romans. And I think the Mythmakers wants to be like the Romans. I think it's written by the same guy. I think it has a lot of comedy moments and a lot of dark moments, but it fails to get the two tones to meld properly together. And I think that's the main problem. Also, Vicky's exit feels very forced, and she should have stayed into the Dalek master plan and been the one who died instead of Katarina. I genuinely believe that would have been so much more of an effective exit for her on screen. It's okay, Mythmakers. It's got a dark ending, but so much of it is just sort of bland. Season 3 is an odd one, because on its day, it's this good. The Dalek Master Plan is that good. I'll put it in great. It could be absolute classic, but Feast of Stephen is rubbish in the middle. It's just such a detraction from the rest of the story. Also, it sort of loses a bit of steam towards the end when the Meddling Monk shows up. But I just love the Meddling Monk so much that I can just look past that. The Dalek Master Plan is a phenomenal story. It's so dark. It's so atmospheric. and it's got the Daleks having their huge plan. It feels like we've had 5 stories up to this point in the Daleks, and it feels like they were all building here. Well, we've had 4 stories and then Mission to the Unknown. It feels like they were all building up here. We've had them on Scarrow, we've had them on Earth, we've had them trying to kill the Doctor, and now this is the universal scheme. And this has guts. It kills companions left, right, and centre. And it really does have a huge sense of scale. And 9 parts are missing. And I was never bored. 9 25-minute chunks where I'm just looking at pictures, and I was never bored by it once. There are very few of the recreations which don't lose my interest at some point. But the Dalek Master Plan is definitely one of them. I also think that as far as recreations go, the Massacre is very good. I'll put that above the Reign of Terror, I think. Yeah, that'll do. That'll do. Brilliant story. I think it's a very, very good story. And I don't know, the ending is the best Hartnell moment and the best Stephen moment. The best Hartnell moment was when he's lamenting the loss of all his companions after Stephen walks out on him. And Stephen walking out is such an incredible moment. And I think he should have stayed gone. Him coming back really cheapened that. And it really cheapened Anne Chaplet's death because, I found her long-lost ancestor. We're just going to go on a companion. We're going to take her as a companion and we're going to run off with her now. And all of that feels like a little detraction. Honestly, this could have gone in great otherwise because it's a solo adventure for Stephen where I think he's possibly at his best. Hartnell's getting to play a doppelganger, which really is just a fun, nice little role to see Hartnell playing someone totally different. And I find the ending one of the darkest moments in all classic Who. The recreation just has these clips. No, it doesn't even have any clips. I don't know what the original version had, but it just has these pictures of these drawings of the massacre itself. And I found it really chilling and really dark. And as someone who's a Protestant, who comes from, whose parents came from a country where people killed each other over religion quite substantially, I find it really, really more dark as a result, I think, seeing these people just, this mob mentality of people just dragging. I think there was a shot of a guy getting dragged by the neck, and it's very vile. And I think it really earns that up over the course of the story, the paranoia between these two groups. And I think we need historicals like this more. As far as lessons from history go, I don't think they did another one as impactful as this until Demons at the Punjab, because it's a serious lesson from history. It's a very dark story, but which I also think is very good and holds my attention through 4 recreated parts, not animated, not anything, just pictures. The arc's great. I'll put it in good, not great, maybe. I just love the idea of the arc, the central concept of they're there, they have a plot, a disease brought by Dodo, who really detracts from the episode, by the way, she's not good. A disease brought by Dodo starts infecting people and killing people, just a disease as normal as the cold. And then the Doctor solves it all in part 2. And it's this little society with the monopoids as like their servants. And it's a bit disturbing that the monopoids are their servants. And then they're just like, right, we're going to leave now at the end of part 2. And they turn up and it's 700 years later. And the monopoids are now in charge and they've taken control. And it's such an interesting idea. Also, I love the monopoid design. I think it's so quirky and weird in a way that only Doctor Who could pull off, and only Doctor Who in the 60s could pull off. Because as soon as you had colour, I think that would totally collapse in on itself. I find the arc to be a charming story. I really, really enjoy it. It's a weird one. It's a very quirky Doctor Who story, but I think it really does earn its stripes. Unlike another story, dear Lord, it's not as bad as The Web Planet, but The Celestial Toymaker is terrible. It's a pantomime episode, and I'm just not there for it. You know, it's Dodo was made to look so stupid. She's also at her worst, and Stephen's just cracking up. All of our individual villains kill themselves in really stupid fashions. The Celestial Toymaker is a celestial being, and the best he can come up with is hopscotch and all of these other stupid little silly games. And, you know, we get these pantomime characters who speak in over-the-top Cockney accents, Mom, And it was a painful viewing experience, particularly without the visual medium to back it up, because it is a very visual story. So maybe with that it would go into bad, but not having this. Really not having it. The Gunfighters is better than Galaxy 4, but I don't know if it should quite go in okay. It's all right. It's bad, but I can watch it without wanting to claw my own eyes out. It's bad and it's silly and it's daft, and the very idea that the whole plot is that the Doctor wants to go to a dentist because the Celestial Toymaker left him some sweets just shows that the show is just sort of losing itself completely. But it has some fun moments, and it's actually all there, which was exciting because I'd gone through a lot of recons by this point. So I don't mind the Gunfighters. I know I put it in bad because I can tell, but conventionally it's bad, and I know it's bad. But it's not. I don't find it a chore to sit through or anything. The Savages. Do you know what? I feel I'm going to put them above Marco Polo, behind the Daleks. I think the Savages are only 4 parts. It's a very interesting story, but it's such an action-packed one. I think there is no story that suffers more for the loss of the episodes, because there's a lot of action and there's a lot of stuff, but there's also a lot of interesting ideas. And I think Stephen gets a decent exit, despite the fact that his perfect exit was a couple of episodes ago. He does get a decent exit, and I do enjoy the Savages. It's not among the best of the show, but I do think it's a fairly solid episode, and yeah, I'll put it in okay. It's middle of the road. The War Machines is great. It really is great. It's a quirky 60s concept that probably couldn't work in any other time period, but then that's part of the charm. It's also the first story set in modern day Earth, and we are 3 seasons in. Take note, New Who, because you don't have to do modern day stories all the time, and it felt fresh and it felt very modern. Even though it's in the 60s, when I was watching, I thought this feels very modern. You know, when Ben and Polly were in the bar and the music was playing, the nightclub. Everything just felt very modern and fresh about it. And the computers are evil take, while basic now, it got to take it in its historical context. And it's a very, very good story. And I really, really do enjoy it. And it's the beginning. It felt like it should have been the beginning of a new chapter. Season 3 had really suffered from the lack of Ian and Barbara. There was no consistency. There was companions leaving and then starting and leaving and starting. There was no solid idea about the show. But with Ben and Polly, it feels like that should have been the beginning of a brand new chapter for Hartnell. But it's just a shame that we never actually got to see that chapter really unfold because of his ill health. The Smugglers. Bad, maybe? Okay, I'll chuck it in okay. I don't have anything really negative to say about it. It's just sort of there. I don't really remember much that happens in it. There's pirates, there's a bit of a conspiracy, a guy gets a knife thrown in his back, which is quite brutal. That's sort of it. Everyone's just waiting for the 10th planet, which honestly, it could push into absolute classic. And in the context of this era, it's definitely just behind the Romans. But I want to keep the quality of each tier consistent in every single video. And I don't think I would put the 10th planet as an absolute classic in an era that had more in that column. So I'll put it in great. I think it's just second to the Romans. It's a very good story. It's a fantastic regeneration story, even though regeneration is not a big part of it. It just sort of happens at the end. It's a shame that Hartnell's out for a bit of it, but I love the Mondasian Cybermen. They're such a great villain, and it feels like, I think I've seen someone say it's like a historical set in the future, and it really does have that futuristic sense going on. Ben and Polly are very good. They have to hold the episode. There's a brilliant supporting cast. You know, Mondasian Cybermen, those amazing voices, and Hartnell's final moments they really actually get me in a way that the writers were not intended, because this is before Doctors had to have poignant endings. There's just the bit where he goes to the screen and goes, "It's far from being all over." Really breaks my heart, because by this point, and I'll talk about Hartnell now, I've really come to love him, and I think he gets totally undersold by the fandom, because there's this idea that he was just this grumpy grandfather figure, and that he doesn't really have the same ideals as the Doctor did now. And at the start, that's valid. but he grows so much as a character. And I'm going to do a video about the Timeless Child and how I think the Timeless Child destroys Hartnell's legacy because it means that he was always special. That'll be a whole other rant, so I'm not going to get into that. But he is humanized by his companions. He becomes a better person for being with these very human companions. He's just the man who ran away and doesn't want to intervene at the start, but he becomes a more reluctant hero. And he's incredibly funny. And none of this ever gets brought up. None of this ever gets mentioned. I think he's so totally undersold by a fandom that just sees him as this grumpy grandfather figure who's, who's okay, but it's just sort of the first. And a lot of people don't seem to really appreciate how good he was in this role. And this era is very enjoyable. I just gushed about season 2, and season 1 and 3 are actually quite okay. There's nothing bad in his era. There's a couple of stories there which are bad, but from an entire era, that's a very small proportion. I think his era is underrated. I think that he is underrated, and I think his companions are underrated. It just deserves a reappraisal. Hartnell really deserves the reappraisal. And yeah, that's sort of it for the video, but I would really like to hear your take on not only the stories and what stories you would put where, but also William Hartnell as the Doctor, because I really do think he's very underrated and that he really does deserve a lot more love by the fandom. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. It's been, I will be doing a few more of these videos as time goes by. I hope to have the second Doctor one out actually tomorrow, I think. So, well, see you then, I suppose.